So I'm having a debate or argument. It's not really a discussion. It's a debate over on PZ Myers' blog, Pharyngula. I'll post a link to this particular blog entry. And the debate concerns the existence of the soul. And I wanted to post a video here because I'm finding it difficult to continue the discussion. And this inevitably happens on PZ Myers' blog because, well, a wall or an inability to communicate is eventually reached, wherein both parties, well, it's usually I who give up after, a day or two, perhaps. Usually, when I get involved on a thread, it lasts for a day or two. But I give up because there's more insults and ad hominem attacks against my arguments than there are responses to my arguments. Or, one response which you could point to at least would be that none of my claims can be supported with any evidence. This word evidence is thrown at me as a philosopher because my arguments they seem well, armchair, right? Like, I haven't actually worked in a laboratory, but I'm talking about what molecular biology can and cannot tell us about the nature of nature, or the nature of the human being, or any other organic creature. And that criticism is valid in some sense. I'm not doing science, and neither are they, at least when they're engaging in philosophical discussions with me at this internet blogging site. And so I get frustrated with this demand for evidence because the different levels of discourse refer to different layers of reality. And if we're going to talk about metaphysics, if we're going to talk about the universe as a whole and the human place within it, then the sorts of evidence that we're going to have to refer to are, for the most part, purely cognitive or purely noetic. They concern issues of mind and spirit, which doesn't mean that we don't have feelings about and perceptual experience of these noetic domains. But when I refer to evidence on a noetic level of discourse, which is a mental level of reality, language and reality, I don't think are separate phenomena. They arise in response to one another. And so in some way there must be a logic to their interaction. And so logic isn't just a mental construct. It actually can reveal to us the underlying nature of reality, because it is that. Logic is the underlying nature of reality. Logic is not just grammar, though. And I know I've made plenty of videos where I say that logic is really just the grammar of our language, which is determined by normativity, right? The sort of habits, ethical habits that human beings have built up in relation to one another, and the customary ways of responding to speech acts. I mean, logic is custom, is what I had said. But in this deeper sense, there's a logic to reality itself, which transcends any arbitrary habit which we may have acquired. Though I think if you look at the history of logic, and this is a tangent here about evidence and what logical evidence would really mean, the history of logic shows that, well, Aristotle's logic ruled sway for a long time. This sort of categorical, hierarchical logic of containers really allowed the human mind to hone its intellectual sword for close to 2,000 years. But then, with the modern scientific paradigm, a new sort of way of calculating the world was devised based upon a sharper distinction between thinker and thought. For Aristotle and the ancient philosophers, the thinker and the thought and the thinker and the world were really part of the same continuum. Mind was in the world. The ideas participated in the becoming of things themselves. Whereas for our modern period, since I guess around Descartes, ideas are things which exist in the mind, and whether or not they refer to real things in the world or not is a difficult question which we usually have to meet with a great deal of skepticism. But because of mathematics, science is able to understand the so-called physical world with a great deal of predictive certainty, or at least probabilistic certainty. We can devise equations for the motion of matter through space and time, or a certain kind of spatialized time at least. We can devise equations that will give us a high degree of predictive understanding. But this calculus is still admitted at the end of the day by all the scientists who use it to be an approximation. Because really there are infinitely many divisions which could be made in any particular container of space. And so Aristotle's logic ultimately fails due to this sort of infinite regress and to the basic emptiness of any particular concept and the lack of foundation beneath all concepts. Descartes basically discovered that conceptuality requires an act of will from the human spirit. So I think, therefore I am, is kind of suggesting that until the human spirit conceives of the concept universe, the universe itself can't properly be said to exist. And that, that sounds totally contrary to your standard materialistic view of the world, where, well, no, the human mind is a later epiphenomenal product of the material world, which is there whether or not I think about it or not. But Descartes, I think, and modern philosophy generally, which is a vast array of interrelated but often contradictory ideas, empiricism and rationalism, they're both modern philosophies. Idealism and reductionism, atheism and any form of theism, these are modern philosophies. And so the terrain is not at all simple. Just because we're modern doesn't mean we're not. Well, it may mean that we think for ourselves and consider evidence and don't just blindly parrot the beliefs of our ancestors. So to be modern is to seek the freedom of thought, and all of science rests upon that basic moral foundation that the human being is meant to live and express themselves according to their own needs, and one of those needs is knowledge. And so testing the world for oneself in order to discover what is true firsthand is a very important value for modern people. And I count myself among those who would demand to have had first-hand immediate experience of anything that they then going to profess as true. Now, we can't always do this because, think about history. Most of history we learned from the last generation, and we can look at the evidence that they had as well, or at least that which they haven't already destroyed, and we can try to decide for ourselves what actually happened. But we really don't know what happened in the past. We just hear stories about it. So we have to trust, at the end of the day, or have faith in the culture which has handed us this history of our species, and even scientific histories of our universe have a mythic quality to them. And this isn't only because within science paradigms are, or at least have, constantly overturned one another, so that the Newtonian cosmology no longer really serves us in light of relativity and quantum theories. We need a new cosmology, and it really, what that cosmology or that comprehensive picture of the universe as a whole will turn out to be, we really don't know yet. Cosmology has been in a state of disarray for 150 years, I think you could say. Newtonian cosmology, and what will replace it? Well, that's a lot of what I, my school and what I personally am trying to do with my philosophical efforts, develop a new cosmology. And I guess to get back to where I started this video, what would the place of the soul be in that cosmology? And how would I gain the authority to talk about that? In the past, for an ancient culture, or at least a medieval culture, truth on these ultimate matters, like the soul, was based on revelation. God wrote it in a book, or had a prophet write it in a book for him. And that's what the soul is, then. It's been revealed to you by God. For a modern person, that really doesn't cut it. We need a model, or maybe not a model, but a way of participating in the actual soul, which is based on our own immediate encounter with it, or becoming as it. Because, for me, when I talk about a soul and whether or not it exists, it's not an irrelevant question. I think it's obvious it does exist, but to even ask the question, to me, sounds silly, because it presupposes, the ability to ask a question presupposes some unified agent of intelligence that exists as you, the questioner. So to even be able to ponder whether or not a soul exists is evidence that the soul exists. What the soul is, it's quite a mystery, and a lot of intelligent people have written about this. They haven't always agreed with one another. But I think, this is a question that should be pursued in a scientific manner. Now, we can't study the soul like we can study an atom of hydrogen, or a so-called inorganic material object, but we can enter into the soul as a phenomenon and hear what it has to tell us, which, as far as I'm concerned, isn't that different from science, as it has always been practiced. Science reads the book of nature and finds meaning in the motions of matter. The materialistic metaphysic that can often be added to science is something else entirely, that I think is ultimately incomprehensible, not to mention entirely irrational. But science, I think, can and should be applied to the spiritual life, so that we can begin to see in common what exists in the spiritual world. I don't think the material and the spiritual are separate worlds, but we aren't born with the organs of perception. We aren't born as a physical organism with the organs of perception, which are necessary to see how spirit lives in matter. We have to grow these organs